Hey there, Joe with Sunset Coast here again to discuss that series on going through diagnosis and how therapists actually sees diagnosing clients. And one of the things to really talk about as we go into that is what is some of the details of how we do diagnose, right? So what I'm going to do within this series is always refer to where we get our diagnosis from, the wonderful DSM-5. And yet again, the most current version is the DSM-5 text revision updated manual. So jumping into that is that there's a big set of criteria for every diagnosis that we have to follow. And in that organizational structure, what we do have is how do we first off differentiate a diagnosis, right? We call it the differential diagnosis. So today, one of the things I'm going to highlight is actually going to be major depressive disorder. And in that, we do have to separate what is major depressive disorder versus, let's say, a personality disorder, such as separating the differences of major depression versus bipolar, which has a manic and depressive episode. So how do we tell the difference? What is the criteria to tell the difference and how that unfolds? So there's one of the things that goes into setting up a proper diagnosis. The other side of that is what we also call comorbidity. So comorbidity is where it fits into another disorder, right? And it can go side by side. And how does that play out when you have, let's say, two diagnoses that are affecting and influencing each other? How do they match, and how do you then tell apart that it's not just one whole separate disorder versus saying two disorders working in unison against the client? And I am going to say a lot of these diagnoses is against the client, and that's why we're here, right? We want to help, we want to alleviate those pressures and stress, and we want to assist in that. So there's some of the big ones, and then we are going to go into the actual criteria of each diagnosis and how that kind of plays out in someone's day-to-day life, and overall how you would see or notice certain behaviors or changes. And so this should be a fun series. And yet again, if you want to see any diagnosis covered, as this is not going to be a short series. I mean, I honestly expect this will easily go longer than a year if I was doing a video almost every day on just diagnosing. So I think this is going to be a really fun educational tool, and those that are curious about disorders are going to get a lot out of this. So if you have any questions, comments, put them up. I'm happy to dive in further, and we shall dive into this type of series. So going into that exact setup is I want to highlight today major depressive disorder. And I might not go the same way that the DSM follows through on it, but let's really dive in. So let's start with that. Major depressive disorder. How do we know if someone has it? Well, one of the rules for major depressive disorder from the DSM is that they must have 5 or more of the following symptoms to have been present over a 2-week period, and at least one of the symptoms is either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So let's go into what those symptoms need to be. The first one is that someone needs to seem depressed or have a depressed mood most of the day, almost every day, and they either feel sad, empty. Hopelessness is a really big key for major depression. As a matter of fact, when I worked for the crisis houses in San Diego, we really wanted to see that as one of the major criteria. Is there a strong feeling of hopelessness, loss of empowerment, and struggle? And that goes back to my other video of the major moods that everyone experiences. And I would say it's a really great one to say, where does depression stem from? The other is a marked decrease in interest and pleasure, pretty much to be no pleasure at all or almost all, right? So not getting out of bed in the morning and not caring about events, sports, activities, work, just kind of this view of life sucks, then you die. And we do usually have to follow up with a screening for safety with those that are struggling with or major depressive disorder, because there is a risk for people getting to a point where they say, well, life's not worth living. So it's really unfortunate, but something for us to really look into. And if we support a lot of that. The third potential criteria out of the 5 that are needed is significant weight loss, right? And we're talking about a change of more than 5%, right? If you lost a pound in a week, usually that's not a concern. I mean, great for you. But if you have a person that's losing rapid weight rather quickly because they stopped eating, then it's a major concern. And we're looking at 5% weight loss within a month. So the other one is either insomnia or hypersomnia every day. So that's either not enough sleep or too much sleep. And we're talking about a drastic measure of difference, right? So when I say not enough sleep or too much sleep, if a person is getting between 6 and 9 hours, that's usually not a cause for concern. When we say insomnia, they are having no mood, lethargy, depressed, and sleeping 3 hours, 4 hours. Then we start to really look and say, okay, why is that? Or if they are sleeping 11 to 14 hours, it's now a big concern because that's eating out a large chunk of their day and they're not functioning the way that they should. And yet again, there's rule-ins, rule-outs. So someone that's only sleeping 3 or 4 hours, how do we tie that to major depressive disorder? Well, then we've got to look at the other criteria versus saying, well, do you have a different issue with simply insomnia? And then we really have to analyze that. The next one is psychomotor agitation or retardation. So are you starting to get real slow and not feel quite capable to do the activities you once did, and your speech is going slower and you don't feel that excitement or intensity in your speech? So that's one to really be noticeable, and it has to be observable by others. There's a big one. Not just feelings, it's a noticeable difference. Then goes back to, yet again, the energy for the day, fatigue or loss of energy for nearly every day, right? I don't feel I can go for that run that I used to do. I don't feel I can do that bike ride just because my mood is off. Another big one that I see with a lot of clients is our 7th criteria that could manifest is feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. No one cares about me, no one loves me, I'm completely worthless, or I am such a horrible person and everybody's against me and I don't want to do anything. The next one is diminished ability to think or concentrate. I've seen that one a lot with those that are struggling with depression. It's just, dude, I can't even think of it right now. I'm just tired. I don't want to do anything. The day's brutal. I don't like it. I don't like any day. That's how we kind of see it. The next one is the one that, when I mentioned we are always analyzing for, is recurrent thoughts of death. Not just a fear of dying, but continuously thinking of dying or death. And they have potentially reoccurrent suicidal ideation, not necessarily with a specific plan or intent. Just, life sucks, then you die, and I don't think my life's worth living anymore. I'm not going to hurt myself. I have no plan to hurt myself, but I don't care if I don't wake up tomorrow. And that's where we get into some safety planning and risk assessment. But those are the 9 major criteria for major depressive disorder. And in order to be diagnosed with it, we need to see 5 of those be present. And if you go through and are talking with somebody and assessing a client, you see 5 of those criteria match up, then we give that diagnosis. And then we start to treat for that diagnosis. So the big one on that too, in order to classify that, you have to go a little bit step farther, right? We have the criteria met. We also have to make sure certain things line up to say it is impairing the client. And this is one of the diagnoses that insurance does cover well. I don't know of any insurance that doesn't like to see major depressive disorder to be covered. No one wants anyone to have major depressive disorder, but when you go through, there's certain disorders that insurance will cover and won't. And the reason why is usually this next one, is that these symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in either a social, occupational, or other area of important functioning. Meaning if you have major depressive disorder, well then, it's influencing your work, it's influencing your family life, it's influencing your social life, and it's causing detrimental problems for your day-to-day. And then we also have to identify the final one there is saying, hey, let's talk about medications, right? This episode of depressive disorder cannot be attributed to the side effects of a substance or another condition, right? So if you are pervasively drinking alcohol and when you're drunk, you're depressed, we're not going to give you a disorder of major depressive disorder. We're going to address substance use for alcohol. So that's where that really fits in. And then we fall into where maybe some comorbidity overlaps and what we have to rule in, rule out. So a good example of this one is if I have a client that comes in and there is other symptoms beyond the 9 criteria we just mentioned that may overlap with another disorder, I have to then go with the one that probably is the most prominent or interactive. I had a client that was very unique at one point that actually had major depressive disorder, schizoaffective type, meaning that we had episodes of hallucinations only when they were depressed. Too. So versus having a client with a disorder such as working with bipolar. So with major depressive disorder and bipolar, like I said at the beginning of this episode, is that we have a overlapping feature here, is that someone with bipolar has a prevalent episode that's usually lasting and pervasive for a significant amount of time. And there's a time scale on how we like to look for any disorder. It's important to address that time scale. So we have severities that go into there. And then I'm going to talk about the difference between major depressive and then bipolar. But when we look at these, in order to address how far or how significant major depressive disorder is flowing or going, the diagnostic code for major depressive disorder is based on whether this is a single episode, a recurrent episode, recurrent severity, or presence of psychotic features, or even remission status. And remission, just throwing that out there, is when the symptomology is not being as pervasive or prevalent and that they are, or you are, in a decent and healthy state to not feel as depressed. So we have to see at least those 5 criteria to diagnose major depressive disorder, but then we have mild, moderate, and severe. So what does a mild episode look like? Well, I have 5 of the symptoms present, but it has minimal impact on my day-to-day life. It has minimal impact on my work, my family, and I am battling it. I'm addressing it. I have skills and tools to cope with it, but it's prevalent and I do need some small support in order to make sure that I can move towards being better. Moderate would say, hey, this has more of a bearing on me that I am able to really truly handle and I'm struggling with it. I am battling it every day. I feel it's a fight. It's impacting more than just myself. It really is having a bearing on my family. It's having a bearing on my social setting. It's having a bearing on my mental health. It's having a bearing on my finances. It's starting to really impact my life. And I'll go into really the mild, moderate, and severe as their own criteria. It's best highlighted when I talk about substance use on how you can see that severity. But then we then talk about what severe looks like. And that's kind of like a total shutdown of everything. It's brutal. It's that I cannot function at all, and I need immediate, proper support and help. Otherwise, everything going on right now is so overwhelming and so horrible that my life's falling apart. So there's the severity diagnosis when we look at major depressive disorder. And yet again, I said there's one with psychotic features, which then is when you're having a depressive episode, you start having hallucinations, hearing voices, or seeing shadows, and it is most prevalent when you are feeling at your lowest. But then we talk into remission, and we have two types. We have impartial remission, and then we have full remission. Partial remission, hey, I'm still battling the symptoms, and it might be looking more like a mild case when initially they started as severe. So there is different variations there that go in that, and then full remission saying, hey, I'm not experiencing this symptomology anymore. I've been battling for a while and I want to see myself do well. And the fun one for remission, right? When we talk about a lot of disorders, there's kind of a general view of it. Partial remission, or we usually see as saying, hey, I've gone 3 months without having much symptomology. I'm doing pretty good. Full remission, we're talking about a year. You're doing really well. It's been a year since you've had any major symptomology. I do say major symptomology because when we go into mood, right, every person has this fluctuating pattern of moods, and that's fine. And we have what we would see as a standard bar graph of moods. And for major depressive disorder, it is that, hey, I don't really hit into the standard range. I'm falling constantly below the norm to feel depressed, versus let's say bipolar, where your mood, a manic episode, is you're feeling way more energetic than what the norm is for others, of what we see on a standard graph, and then you fall into a major depressive episode after that, and it usually goes for a 3-month cycle. And there's kind of one too, is that most people have mood changes around 3 months that we go through. That's like, hey, I'm feeling really peppy, really energetic, feeling good. And then, you know what, my energy's not what it was. I'm still feeling okay, but it's, a couple months ago I was feeling great. Versus bipolar is that real drastic up and down. Then we have major depressive, which is, I've never felt good. I'm feeling only sad. I'm feeling only tired. I'm feeling life's not worth living. So there is the primary criteria for major depressive disorder. And then within another episode, I'll go through and follow up further on potential diagnostic features and further care. Sunset coast,